Hi, everyone. Welcome to Getting Personal with Compt. I'm your host, Lauren Schneider. I'm the head of communications here at Compt. And this is a show that is all about meeting with workplace experts and discussing the ways in which that we can create a better, not just employee experience, but a better human experience at work. Today, I have with me Andy Gauthier. He is the founder of Mighty Startup. And this will be an exciting conversation today because I feel like it is very timely as we approach the end of the year. We are frantically tightening up our budgets and getting ready for January 2024. Andy, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Lauren. It's great to be here.
Of course. Andy, tell me a little bit about yourself and Mighty Startup.
Absolutely. So quick background on myself. My name's Andy Gauthier. I'm an accountant by trade. I turned co-founder several years ago, early in my career, co-founded a B2B SaaS startup called BotKeeper, automating bookkeeping for small businesses and startups. Um, since then have shifted into consulting. So I'm currently running Mighty Startup. We provide fractional finance and accounting solutions to early stage startups and small businesses, helping them get to the next level and achieve whatever success goals they have, whether it's another round of funding, turning profitability on, or anything else.
Cool. So today we're going to be talking about something that is seemingly impossible to quantify the ROI of the employee experience. This is something that we struggle with at Compt and trying to make, the business case for better benefits. Because you got to pull from so many different things. You're looking at like, well, how do you measure culture and what's the cost of losing an employee and having to attract new talent and retention, all of these things. So I was hoping that first you could explain, the significance of the employee experience, like in terms of its impact on a company's bottom line. Like, I think that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. So with early stage startups, mostly the companies we work with, um, the vast majority of their spend is on people, and that's no surprise to most folks. And I think in any organization, employees ultimately determine whether the business is successful or not, one way or another. So that alone, I think, if you look at that data point alone, proves that keeping employees happy, there's got to be some meaningful and very profound value there.
So then how or why, I guess, should business leaders prioritize this? Because I feel like, they're always trying to juggle so many things. Like you're
Mhm.
looking at various overhead costs beyond people. You're thinking about the software and the tools that you need to keep your business running. The recruiting costs. You're thinking about, especially this time of year, like employee benefits packages and new health insurance premiums. And it's like everything is getting more and more expensive. So how do you prioritize people when, in the back of our minds, maybe we know that people are our number one asset, but sometimes they kind of fall down the list of budget line items.
Yeah, I think it's a real problem. It's a challenge a lot of companies face, especially those with tight budgets that aren't flush with cash. Um, I think it's just important to start at the beginning with the planning phase, and before you raise capital for your business, um, make sure you understand the cost to keep employees happy, because it goes a long way. And so certainly there's benchmarks you can use to maybe somewhere between 15 and 20 or upwards of maybe a little higher percent of compensation for taxes and fringe and whatnot. That's one way to make sure it's baked in there somewhere. Um, but also, um, I think, sorry to go back to your question, like how do you prioritize that?
Yeah.
I think it's like any other initiative. If it's up to leadership to make it a priority, and if it's just brought up by HR in passing or brought up by finance in passing or an individual department head, it's not really going to ever be a priority. It really comes with the leadership team coming together and agreeing that it's something that they care about, that they understand will be will create lasting impact and massive success for the company.
So, how, how would you, as a finance person, effectively measure these investments in your people or investments in improving the employee experience? Like, what numbers are you looking for? Say, for example, when the HR team is looking to, implement some new culture initiative and they have to like
Mhm.
make the business case to you.
Yeah, I think it's the same sort of criteria that we would look at for any business investment, whether it's a piece of software to drive more leads or increase sales velocity, whatever the software is, the person requesting it should be able to make a business case for it. I think oftentimes on the people side of things, finance is heavily involved. There's a lot of overlap between finance and people, um, and operations in general. So sometimes it might be actually the finance leader making the case here, depending on the size of the organization. Um, and it is tricky to quantify because we all can agree there's a non-zero value add to keeping employees happy. But how do you define that, right? And it probably varies so drastically from one organization to another. There's all sorts of studies out there you could look at to give you more confidence, but how does that really translate into your specific business? Um, Things that we think about and that I would be looking for would be, let's set a baseline in terms of what's employee happiness today. Before even getting there, what are we trying to accomplish with this program, and outline what the objectives are, where we are today versus where we're trying to go, so that we can set a baseline of where we are today, whether it's employee satisfaction is, you can use a ENPS survey, essentially employee NPS. Um, and if you have a baseline of X, maybe you're trying to move the needle a couple points. Um, that's one example where if you can prove that, it justifies continuing that investment. Other examples that are easier to quantify would be employee retention or turnover, particularly in any functions where it takes some time to get up to speed. Every time you lose an employee and you have to then backfill, suddenly, especially, it just throws a wrench in the whole business operation. So it messes up your sales quota and attainment ability, messes up the production line and the product or service that you're cranking out to generate revenue. Um, all of those are important to think about. And we did. I was part of an interesting study years and years ago, um, and I just remember being astonished at the true cost of turnover in an organization. And it's something that people have trouble quantifying, but when you take the time to dig into the detail and really think through it, it's easier to put numbers to certain things than you might think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's something currently that is still, for some reason, like a struggle where like there's so many articles and headlines and benchmarking data and like people newsletters that are showing up in inboxes that talk about how expensive it is to replace someone,
Mhm.
because maybe you were paying them, I don't know, like $80,000, but now you're looking at like 2 to 3 times their salary if they've left and gone to a competitor, or literally anywhere else if they left, period.
Yeah,
So you don't think about the cost of like what happens after they leave. I maybe it's because like on the front end you're thinking like, oh well, that's $80,000 that like we don't have to pay anymore, maybe, if you
yeah,
didn't necessarily need that role, but if you do, like, what do you
exactly.
do?
Exactly. That's the only time where I think and that's another avenue too. You can quantify employee turnover, or categorize it rather as, is that planned turnover that we're okay with because it falls within reasonable turnover rates, or is it unplanned? And if it's unplanned, is it good turnover because they weren't a good fit or weren't producing, or is it bad turnover because they were a star employee and we just couldn't make them happy? Um, and then, constantly going back and reviewing that information so you can continuously tweak things and get things dialed in terms of your employee engagement and satisfaction. And even if it's kind of good turnover because they weren't performers, it's still not really good turnover. Like there was probably an issue somewhere along in the hiring process that could be investigated and fixed. Um,
Right. I feel like we're in a really weird place. I was gonna say right now, but right now is not even true. We've been in a really weird place for a
always.
long time in in the world of work, especially since COVID, where this is something that Amy, our founder CEO, talks about all the time, where there was a time where finance was in the driver's seat and everything kind of trickled down from there. And then COVID happened and HR suddenly had all of this power and were able to implement so many initiatives to change the way we work effectively. I mean, we had to very quickly pivot from in office to hybrid to remote and back. And now things are with the market shifting yet again, where finance is a little bit more in control,
Mhm.
not as much as they were before all of this started.
Pre-COVID,
There's
yeah.
like there's still like a give and take, or kind of like a everybody's on the same, I keep saying driving the bus, but everybody's like on this ship together and we
Mhm.
all have to keep it afloat. So I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we in the workplace, and maybe it's beyond these two departments, work together to like quantify and I guess qualify these initiatives, like employee experience initiatives. Like, are there strategies to overcome the challenges that we were just talking about, or is it kind of a make it up as you go along kind of thing? Because it's been feeling like we're all just making it up as we go along.
Yeah, I think it's hard to. I have yet to find a playbook that's like the silver bullet that applies to every organization, right? Because there's some nuance and uniqueness to every situation. I think what it boils down to is one, getting leadership buy-in at the top that it is a priority. Two, taking the time to define what are the goals and what's the purpose of investing in a program, or several programs. Um, and then um, again, what tends to happen is other priorities come up and they end up taking center stage. So like you can make it a priority, but when there's 100 other priorities, it still gets lost. So making sure that time is kind of carved out to focus on this initiative one way or another, and kind of designating an owner amongst the leadership team to really drive it forward, I think is helpful. And not again, just not letting it fall to the wayside. Especially in HR, right? Lots of fire drills come up, for various reasons. So making sure that there's a way to spend quality time on it throughout each quarter. And I think the last piece is what we talked about initially, which is it's so difficult to quantify that
Mhm.
what it really boils down to is having to do research on what is it that we're trying to do and why are we trying to do it and how can we prove that we've accomplished that. Like there has to be this like minimum success criteria that we're striving for, um, and just document it, monitor it, and um, I think people will be impressed at the results that a thoughtful program can have in their organization.
I want to double click on something that you said because I hear it so often, and that's getting leadership buy in.
Mhm.
So, to you, as someone who's familiar with the C suite, but still has to make the case to perhaps the CEO where all of this trickles down from, how do you do that? I realize it's a loaded question, but maybe you have
Yeah,
an answer we haven't uncovered
it,
yet.
um, I'm curious what answers you have heard to that. But I think like most things, it depends, right? It depends on the style of the CEO you're working with, the style of the leadership team. Um, in most cases, I think it's helpful. The way anyone would get buy-in from a CFO is to prove the ROI, right? I think similarly, CEOs care about an ROI equally as much. And so if there's it's just proving a valid business purpose to the investment. And
Mm,
if we can get them excited about all the benefits that it has to that increased employee morale have, all, theoretically and almost by default, if you have really happy employees, everyone that they interact with is going to have a better experience. So better experience for your customers, better experience for your vendors, better relationships with both parties. Um, and it just, like, a rising tide lifts all boats in that scenario.
mm.
So I guess going back to your question, like, how do you get the buy-in? I think it just boils down to provide a business use case, that it's hard to say no to. It needs to be a compelling purpose, and if it's well crafted, and if they're confident you or someone else on the team is going to be able to own it and they won't have to think about it or worry about it too much, and they're likely to be in favor of it.
Yeah, that's very much aligned with like what Amy says, for example. She's like, show me the math. And if you show me the pathway to all of
Mm.
it, then like and it makes sense, how can I argue with it? Like
Right.
you've done the work ahead of time, the numbers make sense. I'm a numbers person. Great, excellent. We're all on the same page.
Yep. Exactly.
So the last question that I wanted to ask you was kind of positioned more as a CFO consultant. So from where you're
Mm.
sitting at Mighty Startup. So how or what recommendations would you offer to not just CFOs, but other business leaders who are trying to maximize the financial benefits of a positive employee experience and taking that into consideration while you're also trying to currently balance budget constraints because we know people don't have a lot of budget right now, and then also profitability goals. Like it's this never ending teeter totter.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you have to start with, taking the time to be thoughtful about what you're trying to accomplish. And so rolling out a program for the sake of rolling out a program isn't necessarily going to solve anything. It's like implementing new software because you think something's broken, but not actually diagnosing what's broken and what problem that software is going to solve for you. So um, take the time to think through what you're trying to achieve. Um, I think any program where you can actively engage your team and get feedback from them on what's important to them doesn't have to be a massive dollar investment, right? There's a lot of different programs you can run, and show appreciation to the team, and increase engagement, increase happiness and satisfaction across the org without significant dollars. Little things go a long way. And so I think starting with a dialogue with the team to better understand what motivates them, what would make their life easier, and what they enjoy is a good place to start. And then as far as how to specifically, sorry, I think I strayed a little bit from your question, but um, in terms of balancing budget constraints and profitability goals, ideally the goals of the program, maybe it's increased revenue per FTE, or maybe it's just increased profitability across the company. um, there there could be a variety of financial metrics. It's almost impossible to directly correlate this employee program translated into us in boosting company profit, but there's certainly, without a doubt, an indirect correlation to improving the lives of your employees and the company's performance. Um, there are specific numbers that can be directly attributable, like cost of training new employees that might not have needed to be hired if you didn't lose an employee. And so you can get specific depending on the program and what your goals are. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. That's definitely something that's been so difficult because you're right. Like there's a lot of indirect evidence and data. Like we
Mhm.
see that, people who experience better work-life balance report having higher levels of productivity, or people who, you know, don't take enough vacation time are more likely to be burnt out. And because they're burnt out, they have a more negative experience at work and that impacts the company culture. But then it's like it's all these
Mhm.
inner workings and interweavings, everything's intertwined. And have you, this is hilarious to me. Have you seen that meme of Charlie Day? And he's like standing in front of a board with a bunch of like
I
post-it
don't
notes
think
and there's
so.
strings all over the place and he's just pointing like everywhere. That is very much, I would say, crafting an employee experience and like company culture. Like everything's kind of connected in some crazy way
Some
that's
way,
not
yeah.
immediately evident, but it makes sense when you start really diving into all of these into this data, into the conversations that like you and I are having. So it's a lot, but I
Yeah,
appreciate, you trying to give me answers to these, like, very hefty questions because I do
sure.
realize that it's different for every organization.
Yeah, and it's just a very opaque topic. So hopefully through more conversations like this, we can create a little bit more clarity for everyone else.
Of course. Thanks for your time, Andy, I appreciate it, and I wanted to ask you before we go, if people are interested in working with you, working with an organization like Mighty Startup, um, how would they benefit? And also where could they reach you?
Absolutely. Um, yeah, so we work with primarily early stage B2B SaaS startups, pre-seed through Series B. Um, and they can reach out to us through our website, reach out to me directly through email, just andy@mightystartup.com, or follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. We're not too active on either platform, but starting to flex our marketing muscles. So
It's because 'cause you're too busy helping everybody.
trying
That's
trying to. There's a lot of folks that can definitely benefit from a some support on the budgeting front and many other areas. So
I believe it. Andy, thanks again for your time. For anyone else who would like to be a guest on Getting Personal with Comp, shoot me an email, lauren@comp.io.